All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome on in. Let me adjust this a little bit. Okay, here we are. Welcome on in. Attendance looks a little low. Hopefully, we'll have more people coming in here soon. We really need better attendance than that at these meetings. Let me turn off this sound effect here. And thank you for those of you who are putting your name up there so that I can get roll taken even a little bit easier. Please do that as you're coming in. If you haven't put your name up there yet, do that. It'll just make the process a little bit quicker when I go through and I take roll here in a few minutes. All right, a little bit easier for me. Okay, thanks. That just makes it a little quicker and easier for everybody as we go. What do we got? Clark K. Claire K. And then Jose. Okay, so I'll check up on that in a few minutes. Hopefully we'll have some more people coming in and checking things out. And then let's see, why is it showing? This is kind of a weird view. It's showing me at the moment. That's strange. Zoom's doing something weird here. That was weird. Okay, anyways, it looks like it's right now. Okay, so a couple things I wanted to mention going forward. One, I know I'm talking to the people who showed up to class, but again, super important that you come to class. So like for instance, there's a thing we're going to do in a few minutes in the chat that some of you will benefit greatly from that you will miss out on if you weren't here for the live meeting. So helpful to do that. So make sure you're showing up, doing all that kind of stuff. I have been, getting emails from my various classes with different questions. I would say even still, most of the emails I'm getting don't really give me enough information to be able to answer your question entirely, especially if it's a technical difficulty with the software or something like that. And you're welcome to email me. Screenshots are really helpful, right? Sometimes students think that something's going wrong for one reason, and so they'll say, oh, this is why it's not letting me do this. And then when we get into it, it turns out that's not really what the problem was at all. So, sometimes students just misunderstand the technology. So screenshots, if you're having trouble with something on the screen, just screenshot it and send it to me. Usually helps quite a bit. Remember that you can ask a question from right inside the homework. There's a little option down at the bottom where it will send me the question, and then I know exactly which one you're talking about. That's helpful. So feel free to use that, and I'll get back to you as much as I can. If you're really having problems, come to office hours, and I can actually do like see your screen, because sometimes students say, well, it's doing this, and then it turns out that's not what it's doing, and they're not lying. It's just they don't really understand how the software works. And so, if I can see what's going on, that's usually a lot easier. So sending me a screenshot, meeting me in office hours, and sharing screen, that kind of stuff, we can usually move forward quicker. Sorry, the roll didn't look right for a second. I just want to make sure we got everyone. Okay, I think I got everyone. I'll check in a little bit here. So yeah, feel free to get a hold of me if the software's not working right. Make sure you're getting the license set up, right? Those of you who haven't done that yet, you're just getting farther and further behind. every day. I will remind you, I know it sounds like I'm repeating a lot of this stuff, but I kind of have to because people always kind of miss it. Remember, I'm not going to be able to cover every single thing in class, and there are certain things that I cover in class that don't get expanded on very much in the homework. So you really need to be both watching these meetings and also watching the video lessons, and make sure that you're going through and that you're doing both of those things. It's not enough to do one or the other and go, oh, well, I'll go to the class meetings. That's enough. You'll be very confused because you'll be missing lots of stuff. And then you can't just go to the lessons because you're going to miss a lot of the overview that kind of brings all these topics together. So make sure that you're doing both of those. And then let me see. I had written down something I want to talk about. Where was that? Right. Okay. So anyways, going to the modules. So hopefully you're basically done with chapter 1. I know some of you are still working on it, but that chapter 1, this is not too bad, due today. So make sure you're getting those points. You got to do both the lessons and the assessments. Make sure you're doing both. The lesson really gives you some information and make sure you understand it. The assessment is like homework. That's where you actually like retain the information. If you just go to a lecture and watch something, but you don't engage your mind with that information, your brain forgets it. So both of those pieces, very, very important in order to be able to retain this information, both for the class, because if you want to do well in the class, but also what's the point of learning this stuff if you're going to forget it at the end of the semester or sooner, right? Then the whole point of going to college is that these classes are supposed to make you better in lots of different ways. Doesn't make any sense if you can't remember any of that information. So with math, it's really important to do homework. I try not to bury you in homework, but it's really important to do that homework so that those ideas actually get solidified into your head. Okay? Now, so you can see we've got yesterday was due the first part of points for your project, right? So you can see, remember, the discussion boards are generally pretty straightforward ways of getting points that count towards the project. I forget the total number of points that count towards the project, but something like 30 or 40% of your project points will be earned before you turn your project in, right? Because they get picked up here in these discussions at the end of these chapters. You'll earn points for those. So make sure you're getting that, because that's kind of the easy points to get. All you have to do is go in there and do the thing that it's saying to do. And if you have questions on how to do that thing that's in the discussion, well, look what other people are doing. Come to office hours, go to the tutoring center, and ask people in your group. That's 4 outlets you have for making sure that you can put a post in these discussions that's going to get you points. Okay, you really want those early on points, because the final project that you turn in at the end of the semester gets graded harder. Okay, here I'm pretty lenient because like forming groups is pretty straightforward. You either formed a group or you didn't, right? Or participated in this discussion or didn't. Most of these discussions are set up so that you're getting in there, you're getting used to doing that thing on StatCrunch, right? You're getting used to, how do I get StatCrunch to do a confidence interval? Do I really understand what a confidence interval is? Do I understand how to post it in here? Like those are things that you're doing as you're first doing these discussions. So I grade it a little easier because it's just a matter of, did you get in there and try to do it? By the end of the semester, when you're putting everything together for your project, you should be better at it, because you didn't just learn confidence intervals. You learned them a month earlier. You've had time to get better at them and get comfortable with them and that kind of stuff. So don't miss these opportunities to get project points. At the end of the semester, it's a little harder. So what you want is, if you can get every point from these assignments for your project, and then maybe you don't get an A on your project like you had hoped, maybe you get a B or a C, at least those points, the easy to get points, the low-hanging fruit that you earned earlier, will maybe pull your grade up, at least better than that final grade on the project, right? And I'm not saying people won't get A's on the project, but I'm just letting you know they're graded harder than these early assignments right here. So get those points now. Now, 2 things happened. One of these assignments closed yesterday, Oops. Oh, do I have an echo in here? Sorry, if there's an echo on YouTube, I didn't have it muted. If there's ever an echo, let me know, because obviously that makes it hard to hear. So you can always just let me know in the chat if there's a weird echo on the YouTube stream, and I can fix that. Okay. Sometimes I forget to mute it. There's so many things I got to do, and I'm setting everything up. So the groups one closed yesterday, which means I will go through, and one of the things, making a note of it right now, is, let's see, stats, group, discussion, grade. So I'll go through and grade that today. So those of you who did what you were supposed to do and left a comment on there and tried to form a group, you'll get your 10 points. Now, I'm not actually grading you on if you formed your group. I'm great because I know it's a little tricky sometimes dealing with other people that you don't know. But if you went in there and I see a post was left where you're like, hey, here's me, here's what I'm about, anybody want to form a group with me? Even if no one formed a group with you, that's okay. You're still going to get your 10 points because you went in and you tried to do the assignment. Okay, so that's what I mean. I'm pretty lenient about how I grade these project discussions early on. You know, we'll sort of I'll expect a little bit more throughout the semester, but right now it's kind of like that one was pretty easy points. Just go in there and say, here's who I am. Someone want to form a group? So you'll get those 10 points whether you formed a group or not. That'll get done later today. What if you didn't form a group? What if you went in there and you didn't end up in a group? Okay, so let's remember first, I just want to remind everyone what the groups are for. You will each do your own work on the project. You will each make your own post in these discussion projects, and you will each turn in your own project. You never get credit for something someone else did. You never get to say, oh, Jennifer mentioned me in her post, so just give me credit for that one. Nope, you got to leave your own post, your own comment. And the project at the end of the semester is you. So what's the point of the groups? Because many students get very confused along the way, and being in groups usually helps people because then you have people built in that you're somewhat forming a bit of a relationship with in the class. Not that it has to be like, you know, that sounds kind of like serious or intense or something. It's just a group of people that when you're confused, you can get together and go, do you understand this thing he's talking about how we're supposed to post for confidence intervals? What did you do? And then you all help each other out with that, okay? That's really the point of the groups, is that you have a bit of a support group. The way I've seen this work the best, and the students who get the best grades on their project, have their groups meet like once every week or 2 weeks, right? Because then you come together as a group. Each person brings the work that they've done to prepare and then says, here's what I did, what did you do? Let me look at what you did, and you can see what I did, and then maybe we can learn from each other a little bit. That's super helpful if you use that. I know a lot of there are groups that have the whole spectrum. I see groups that meet once a week, and when they don't have anything to work on the project, they talk about the homework and they help each other out with the homework. That's fantastic. I see other groups that meet as little as possible, and they just try to do the minimal meetings, and there's sort of, you know, some people will try to get through a class doing everything minimalist. They're shooting for a 70.000, hoping to get that C so that they can just not have to take stats anymore. That's usually not a great way to do it. Those groups don't do as well, both on the homework and tests, because, you know, like I say, the first scenario, when those people don't have anything to talk about on the project, they're helping each other with homework and stuff. Those students do really well. If you use your project and the group in a minimalist way, then you're going to get minimalist work, like help from it, right? And then you'll be struggling more and your grades won't be as good. That's kind of the overall behavior of things, right? That's not to say if you're working by yourself you can't get an A, but it's very rare, right, where a student is totally on their own and does well in the stats class. I mean, I see it, maybe one student a semester, but by and large, most students are doing better when they're in a group because you can ask questions and you can get help with what you're doing. So that's why those groups are really important. Now, what if you're saying, well, I went in that group, in the group discussion board, and I left a message, but I don't think I ended up in a group with anybody. That's okay. Like I say, I'm still going to give you points. If you left a good post in there and you tried to participate, then you get your points for that. But there's still the issue of you not being in a group. So what you can do, this works well. I've seen this every semester. This kind of works out at the end here when we still have people who haven't formed their groups. Just form them in the chat, right? Whether you're on Zoom or you're on YouTube, just put in there like, hey, I don't have a group. Anyone else still need a group? And then you will just form a group. And then once you've sort of decided you're in a group in chat, you don't have to work everything out in here. You don't have to put personal emails or however you want to contact each other. But once you form a group here in chat, if there's anyone who didn't make it into a group, you say, hey, I'm so-and-so, I need a group. Anyone else need a group? And someone else says, I do. Let's be in a group. Then you can take it into Canvas or whatever way you want to communicate. With social media, there's millions of ways to communicate now. And I see students do all sorts of stuff, right? I've seen students who, they set up a Discord, or they set up, they like to text each other. Some people like to, whatever way that you contact each other that you're comfortable with is fine. I don't really care how you contact each other. So if you don't want to give out an email, don't give out your email. If you want to use Twitter or whatever to communicate with each other, I mean, some of these are not really great ways to communicate for studying, but use whatever you want. I've seen groups make all sorts of choices, and I'm not going to judge that. Like, you just need to be able to get together with your groups at different times and figure out what's going on, what you're doing, right? So that's kind of how the groups are going to go. I'm not seeing any names popping up or comments, so I assume that means everyone is comfortably in a group and ready to move forward with things. If not, I would take care of it. It's kind of like everything else in this class. Each day you wait is just sort of making it harder for you for the rest of the semester. So if you need a group, figure that out in chat right now. Okay, so what's the next one? You can see there's this new one here that is now, it should be live in your Canvas. It looks like it's got the green check, so it should be submitted or published. So you should be able to see that. So when you go in there, I want your survey questions now. That's the next stage. First stage was forming your groups. Next stage, you're going to figure out the survey questions. I'm going to create a massive survey of like however many questions you come up with. I would guess somewhere in the neighborhood of, for this class, maybe 80 total, but it might be, sometimes it gets over 100. You need to figure out your topic, and you need to figure out the questions that you're going to use for your topic. So you actually know some more statistics than you did when we first came in on day one, and I say things like quantitative variable, and you're like, wait, what? Or categorical, and you're like, I don't know what that means. Hopefully some of these terms are starting to make more sense to you. So again, we're still going to be going over definitions. I know there's a lot of them. Luckily, most of these definitions are fairly straightforward, but you're going to have to understand the survey questions that you choose are going to make your life easier or harder for the next 18 weeks. So we will be talking this week and next week about, we already have talked somewhat about questions and forming good questions, and I'll talk more about it so you can form good questions. But you need at the bare minimum 5 questions. 2 quantitative, 2 categorical, and 1 like binary. So a true, false, yes, no, day, night, something like that, right? Like there's all sorts of versions of this. I see, there's the question, do you prefer your classes to be online, on ground? 2 choices, binary. Do you prefer to work out in the day or the night, right? That's similar to a question I've seen before. Do you prefer... or do you support the tobacco ban on campus? Yes, no, right? So it's just, there's only 2 possible outcomes for these kinds of questions. So you need one of those because certain statistics only apply to questions like that, where there's just a binary outcome. There's 2 outcomes, and there's no other possibility. You're either in box number 1 or you're in box number 2, and that's the only choices available. So you need 1 question like that. You need 2 categorical. Remember, categorical are things like eye color, political party affiliation. It's basically you can put people in boxes, right? Are you Republican, Democrat, independent, neither, socialist, whatever your thing is that you are, we can put you in that box. Okay? So those categorical, just think eye color. Okay, there's like 5 eye colors we could go by, right? There's like 3 common ones. And then quantitative. The reason you have to have two quantitative questions is that later on in the semester we'll be talking about correlation, and that is looking at the connection between our quantitative variables. So for instance, I've talked before about the situation where we've seen that as ice cream sales rise, so do shark attacks, and as the number of vehicles you own goes up, so does life expectancy. Well, you can see those by looking at a graph, but looking at a graph just gives you the overall behavior. Graphs are really helpful. We'll be talking about those coming up as well. That's going to be part of your project. But we want to be able to do better than just look at a graph and go, well, it kind of looks like those variables are related. I don't know. Like, I would say so. And then someone else in your group's like, I don't know. I don't really think they're that closely related. We need a better instrument than just looking at a graph. And that instrument is called the correlation coefficient. It's the letter R. It's hugely important in statistics. In fact, there's a programming language written specifically for doing statistics, right? And it's called R, the letter R, because that correlation coefficient in statistics is so hugely important. They named the whole programming language after it. You can't do that if you don't have 2 quantitative questions. So that's a huge part. Like if I'm looking at your project at the end of the semester and there's no mention of correlation or regression lines or any of that stuff we're going to go over, you're going to get marked down because I'm like, how could you possibly have not talked about this huge portion of the class? So you need to make sure you can do that. And a lot of times there's a saying out there that I think I've probably in this class have already talked about procrastination and how honestly it's one of people's biggest enemy, and they don't realize it, is procrastinating really kind of sets you up for doing poorly. One aspect of procrastination is not planning things well. Just going, well, I'll do this first part, but then we'll worry about the rest of it later. And, there's this saying, and I hate throwing around this saying, but it's very true, which is that failing to plan is planning to fail, right? You're setting yourself up for failure if you don't plan things out and do things proactively. You wait till the last minute. You're in a rush. You're just trying to get it done so you can turn it in, and your work's not going to be as good. So statistics works that way as well, because we've been talking in the last day about all the different ways that you can set up your survey and your statistics poorly. Right? We talked about sometimes data is so bad you can't even fix it. You can't recover it. You can't do anything about it. That's not what you want to do. If you plan properly, then your questions will be well written, and then they will form good data for you. If your questions are poorly written, you're going to have a much harder time dealing with this data, and you're going to be dealing with this data until the end of the semester. So this is one of those situations where spending an hour with your group really writing good questions might save you hours later on. And that's, I think, sometimes a thing that I watch students, and a lot of times they don't get this. There's this sort Eastern idea of go slow to go fast, which means it's kind of the opposite of what a lot of students do. A lot of students go fast to go slow, right? Which is, I'm going to do the thing that makes me most time efficient today, but then you pay for it later, right? It's kind of this idea of like, if you don't rinse your dishes right after you eat, then the food hardens. And then when you go to clean them, it takes you 10 times longer to clean the dishes, right? Whereas if you just, sort of were proactive and rinse those dishes off right after you ate, it takes like a second to rinse a plate, and then you just put it right in the dishwasher, whatever the situation is at your house for cleaning. But I think most people understand if you let dishes dry and harden, then they're a lot harder to clean. It's the same way with statistics. You can save yourself, an hour now by not really writing good questions, but you're going to pay many hours back over the course of the semester because you're going to have so much time fighting your data. And that comes down to writing good questions, right? So don't, like I've talked a little bit about this, don't ask, how tall are you? Because you're going to get 5 different types of answers where people format their answers differently, and you're going to have to go through and change all that. So a good question would be, how tall are you in inches? And then people are going to go, oh, I should write 72, 68, whatever your height is, it's understanding, oh, I should convert to inches and put it in there. If you just say, how tall are you, you're going to get, people are going to write 5, apostrophe 8, double apostrophe, or they'll write 5, the word foot, 8, the word inches, and StatCrunch won't be able to process that column. You're going to have to go through and fix it all. And that's actually the best case scenario when you have bad column data, is that you can just go through and fix it. Sometimes you won't be able to fix it at all. Sometimes people write bad questions, right? The proverbial, like, what did you do this summer? Like, how are you going to process statistically any kind of questions like that? So you really want to write good questions now, right? It's the go slow to go fast. So go slow now, spend an hour with your group writing good questions. It's going to save all of you time throughout the rest of the semester, not having to fight that data and fight with it. What I will say as a heads up is, don't panic too much. You are allowed to use any questions in the entire survey that you need to. So a lot of time, but that doesn't mean don't write 5 of your own. In order to get credit, we need 5 questions here from each group. Okay. So, but what that means is if you come up and, sometimes this always happens, where at least one group like realizes afterwards, like, oh, we didn't do a good job writing our questions. And sometimes it's because they didn't spend enough time doing it right. Sometimes it's just because this stuff's new to you and you're all learning. So it's, the first time you do something, when you first learn to do something and then you go out to do it on your own, a lot of times it doesn't go well, right? That's that learning process, and being comfortable with making mistakes, comfortable with failing. Failing's okay as long as you learn from it and you don't make the same mistakes afterwards, right? So you come out, you make some questions, and you're like, oh, that was a disaster. No one answered the question the way we wanted them to or the way we expected them to. And you can't blame other people, right? The person who asks, how tall are you, and gets 5 different types of formatted responses, it's really their fault for not asking the question better and saying, how tall are you in inches? And like making it clear, this is how you're supposed to respond, right? If you ask a question and and people are answering it differently than you would want them to, occasionally you get one here and there. But if you're getting all sorts of responses, that should be a lesson to you. Oh, I didn't ask that question very well. And that's okay. It's not the end of the world, right? This is a learning process, and you're in a class to learn. That's the whole point. So don't beat yourself up over it, but you want to learn from it, okay? So come up with 2 quantitative questions, 2 categorical, 1 binary question that has to do with some theme, right? They should be related in some way. So I've talked about the overall themes. COVID's a big one. School is a big one. Work, exercise, eating habits. I see a lot of all of those. The environment. There's always at least one group that's concerned about them asking questions about the environment. I mean, really, as long as it's appropriate, if there's a topic you've ever wondered what other people think about things or what their opinions or what their lives are like, throw it in here, right? And it'll be, you can find out about, again, class appropriate. We don't want to get like weird with stuff, but here's your chance to pick a topic, ask some questions about it, and then go on from there. When you submit your questions, sometimes I will try to, I might do an edit here or there to try to make it a little bit clearer, just to make it smoother. But sometimes I'm not able to. Sometimes a question is like, well, I'm going to let that one go through, and they're going to have to figure out how to deal with it. Sometimes if I see, if I just change this one word, it's probably going to work a little bit better. So don't rely on me to fix your questions for you. But sometimes if I see something I can fix, I do. But I'm not going to like do a second draft of everyone's questions in order to make them right. Okay, so don't rely on that. But if we give this survey and you realize that your questions are terrible and you're not even going to be able to do any work with them, that's okay. You can choose other questions. There's no ownership of these questions in the project, but your group should be submitting questions for your group. Okay, it's not like we can just have 5 questions and the whole class uses those 5 questions. That's not the point. So that's why you get in here, you will get points for your own group creating the questions and setting those up. Those are project points that you're doing. Okay, so just kind of be aware of that. And then, of course, as always, really hoping to minimize the number of emails I get about this just so there's no confusion. Each group member must leave a posting in order to get credit. So again, you can't say, oh yeah, I'm in Jennifer's group and she left a post. Well, Jennifer will get credit, you will not. Okay. It's a little easier too if you don't repeat the questions. You don't have to post all 5 of your group's questions, because if you have 3 people and you all post 5 questions, there's a lot of redundancy, and I don't catch all the redundancies. So, what you might do in your group is you say, okay, you ask these 2 questions, you ask these 2 questions, I'm going to ask this 1 question. And then that's fine, because your group is still getting their 5 questions submitted. Okay? So, does that make sense? Hopefully, if you have any questions, feel free to ask me about it. And we want those in a couple weeks, but I'm still going to give you some time to kind of learn and take time to write good questions, right? So that you're meeting with your group and you're saying, here I wrote up 5 questions. What did the rest of you think about it? And then you can go through and go, oh, I like your question, but what if we change it just slightly to this? I think that might work a little better. Oh, you're right. And then you can all use those questions, but you each need to make your own posting to get the credit. Okay. Oh, right. And I make sure that date is pretty solid. The February 7th date, I think. Wait, why does this? Oh yeah, due February 6th, because you can't move forward with your projects until you have the results of the survey, and we can't access the results of the survey until we've taken the survey, and we can't take the survey until you give me your questions. So you see how in some sense, like, it's really important we do the survey questions well, but also it's holding everything up, because until I get the survey questions, I can't create the survey, you can't take it, and we can't start crunching the results that you'll be doing after each chapter that you'll be going through. So I can't really wait after that. So don't wait till the last minute and then ask for an extension. I can't give an extension on that. So make sure that you've done it by then. Okay. All right. Let me just go through. I think at this point everyone who's coming should be here. So let's see. I'm missing Willie D. I think he's not around anymore. Oops. I put everyone on Saturday. That's okay. This is just make a note. Obviously, it's not a Saturday class. It's my records. Okay. Ashlyn F. If I'm calling your name, that means I do not have you down. If you don't hear your name, that means I have you marked down as here. If you hear your name, make sure you let me know you're here. Ashlyn F. Oh, and then we had, oh, right. Ashlyn F. And then you all did pretty good today. Letting me know what's going on. Luis L. I didn't see that. Oh, yep, you're in. I see you there. You're now in Zoom, so I got you. Okay, Luis L., you're good. And I think that's everybody. I think I got everybody else, so we're good. Okay, thanks everybody. That was much faster and easier than we've been doing it. And I believe at the end of this week is census. So that's one I'm supposed to drop everyone is this weekend, who people who have not been doing the homework, that kind of stuff. So my office hours today, I would have to double check. I believe my office hours are from 12 to 1 today, yes. And also, I'm happy to talk with people right when class ends. So if you just want to stick around and talk to me, I'm happy to do that. If you want to come back between noon and 1, I'm happy to do that. Just be aware I do teach a class at 1, so don't come in at like 12:55 and then think I can like help you for a while, because I have to get my next class going. So, but yep, I'm happy to talk to you right after class. There's a question on the stream, so that's why I'm in case you didn't see it. So, yep, I can help you right after class. I can help you from 12 to 1. Either one's fine. Okay, so if there's any questions, as always, feel free to ask. Throw a question into chat, and then I can get to it. But I think this is pretty straightforward. Make sure you understand what quantitative excuse me. Sorry about that. Make sure you understand what quantitative and categorical questions are. It's super important so that you can do this assignment, but it's also important because it's literally going to come up all semester long. I see people in weeks 10, 12, 14, 18 still trying to use quantitative tools on categorical questions. And they're going, why doesn't it work? It doesn't work because you're applying a tool to the wrong thing. So, because there's a pretty clear divide, right? The question between, like, even though we haven't learned most of them yet, I think it's obvious the tools we can use to analyze a question like, what is your age, is a different set of tools than we can use to analyze things like, what is your eye color? For instance, the mean. I think we all understand that, yeah, we could take the mean of the ages of everyone in the classroom. Can we take the mean of the eye color of everyone? No, that doesn't really make sense, right? So you see different tools for different types of questions. You really want to understand quantitative versus categorical. Categorical is also known as qualitative. And quantitative and qualitative sounds similar, but again, remember qualitative, like quality, the aspect, the characteristic of a thing. Quantitative, quantity means how much of something, right? You've counted something. Okay, so I think we're good there. And we should be good. And again, I haven't heard any weirdness from the bookstores or from students with the bookstore, so I assume that's all going well. Okay, so and that's at the end. That stuff's at the end of your chapter 1 module. So make sure you're hitting that up, and then we'll be moving along into chapter 2. So last couple things I just wanted to hit here so we kind of understand, and then we'll get more into chapter 2. The studies are done differently. So a cross-sectional study, data are observed, measured, and collected all at one point in time. So you sit down, here's this week we're collecting our data, you've got it all at once, and then you move forward with your project, collecting analyzing all that data. That's kind of what we're doing. We're just collecting one point in time. We're going to run a survey. Everyone's going to take the survey, and that's the one time during our class that we collected the information, right? It's just once. There's also what's called a retrospective study, where data are collected from the past by going back in time. Now that sounds weird. You're like, wait, we figured out how to go back in time? No, they mean like not like a time machine. You're going back in time through records. So a lot of times you'll see there are certain ways in which this is really convenient. Basically, anyone who's really good at keeping data, statisticians love it because then they can go in there and they can look at past data. For instance, hospitals, really good with this. Hospitals keep really good records of births and deaths, whatever happened in the hospital. This patient came in on this day, we treated them for this, they died on this day, or they got better and went home. Like there's a record of that in all likelihood in the hospital. Statisticians like this because then they can say, we want to study this one thing. Why don't we go look at the last 60 years of hospital records? And then they go back and look at it. So that's a retrospective study, right? You go into the hospital, you say, we want to look at infant mortality rates, and you check it out. They say, okay, we don't want you to use anybody's name, and there's rules about using people's medical information, but if the hospital probably is able to provide that information without names and social security numbers and stuff like that, then people can run their statistics, right? For instance, one thing that usually is kind of shocking to people, because people have this idea that we have such a great healthcare system, which is arguable whether we do or not, whatever your feelings are on healthcare. We have many Americans who have no healthcare, and then many Americans actually have rather poor healthcare. One of the things that might surprise you is the United States ranks rather low when it comes to infant mortality rates, right? People will tell you what a great healthcare system is. Well, compare our infant mortality rates to Europe. We don't look so good. So how do we know that? Well, people have studied this. They went to hospitals and said, I want to look at 60 years of the infant mortality rate. And you can see that rate goes up and down based on laws that are passed, based on healthcare rules, how many people had healthcare, all this kind of stuff. You can go back and you can say like, oh, when we changed this law, look, infant mortality went down. Why is that? And it's, that's part of statistics, is trying to uncover, like, let's see, you're talking about a healthcare law that was passed, which was really about health insurance. And then after we changed the way people have health insurance, the infant mortality rate went up. Oh, that's not immediately obvious. And then you look into it and you figure out the connection, right? So that's a retrospective study. A prospective study, data are collected in the future from groups sharing common factors called cohorts. You may have seen this, that, cohorts is just a group of people that kind of move along together. In education, they use cohorts where, like, you might be in a group of people taking 2 classes together. So you might be in the same nursing class, and then you're in the same, like, I don't know, whatever, some paramedic class or something that are related. They call it a cohort. Sometimes studies are done that way, where they look at one group of people and then they check back in with them. There's a famous series that was done in, I think, England, if I remember right. I think it was a BBC project, where they took these people and every 7 years they went back and visited their lives. So like you saw them at, like, I don't remember when they started, if they started at 1 or something, but then it was maybe like at birth, and then they checked in with these people at 7, and then 14, 21. And the BBC special just goes through every 7 years they checked in with this cohort of individuals and saw, like, they updated their statistics for these people. Those can be very, very helpful. Very hard to do, because if you're checking in with people every 7 years, that means that your whole study takes decades to do. That's tricky. Those researchers probably had other stuff going on in the meantime, but it's a ambitious project. It's hard to pull off. So that's what a prospective study would be. Okay. We have design of experiments. You have to remember the big category, the difference between experiments and observations. Are you just observing something, or are you changing the way something is done? Are you just measuring the yellow light times at the intersection? If so, the yellow lights aren't changing because of you. You're just timing them. You're not really affecting anything. If you're giving people an experimental vaccine, you're changing things. You're changing that person's life by giving them a vaccine or not, because maybe the vaccine you give them will keep them from getting sick. Maybe the vaccine you give them will have some other problem. We don't know. That's why we run these kind of studies, right? So another really important one, I see people get confused with that later in the semester, and then they end up using the wrong tool at the wrong time. Replication. Replication is huge in any kind of scientific endeavor, right? Many of the things that we think are true were actually done by people who were never able to replicate. No one was ever able to replicate those experiments, and oftentimes they are later debunked. But sometimes it's too late. Okay, so one example. You may have heard about people talking to plants. There was basically what happens when something weird comes out in science, the news likes to talk about it, but the news is terrible at talking about science, right? Because basically all the people, the broadcasters and the people working for news, they understand almost no science. So they usually end up reporting the science very poorly. But if there's a headline they can put out there that'll get attention, they do it, right? So like in the 70s, this researcher did some research, and his work purported to show that talking to plants and playing music for plants helps them grow better, right? So this is, like, you may have actually heard this. This is kind of one of those urban legends that goes around. Oh, if you play music, you play Mozart for your plants, they'll grow better. That individual published that work. No one has ever been able to replicate those results. So in all likelihood, and I don't remember, I think maybe it even came out later, but in all likelihood, that person either did a terrible job of conducting their experiment, or more likely they intentionally got bad results so they could get attention or whatever. I mean, if you're a researcher, one of the things you want is you want headline getting research because that gets you attention. It builds your name, sort of like your brand. You could think of it, if you're a researcher, you have like your brand, that your reputation. Do people know about you? You have to be able to replicate things. So that's one of the first thing that happens when people do really interesting research is someone needs to replicate it because we need to know if this is legitimate or not. Some of you are too old to remember this, but this vaccine hesitancy is not new. It's been going on for decades. The original research that sparked all this, like I say, most of you were like either not born or were babies when this started coming out. There was a paper that came out that was connecting vaccines to autism. It got a lot of, it really built up a big community of people really not wanting to give. That's sort of where the anti-vaccination really picked up steam. There's always been anti-vaccination groups, but that's where it really started to pick up because then people said, well, hey, look, this is science. This is science saying that vaccines, and I'm not talking about COVID vaccines, but like this is, 10, 15 years ago, people saying, look, this researcher did science that shows that the vaccines are bad or dangerous. Well, a few years later, no one was able to replicate those results. And a few years later, it turned out that, once pressure was put on that researcher, that in fact, those results had been made up in order to get attention and make a paper that looked really good and, made a name for themselves. But really, unfortunately, what it did was it sort of launched this whole anti-vaccination thing. And you'll still hear people reference that same paper who either don't know or don't care that it has since been retracted. What happens is then the journal who publishes says, we're retracting this because it turns out there were errors in that work. It's not as scientifically sound. In this case, just it appears it was downright fraudulent. So they take it back. But sometimes, like in this case, once the movement's out there, it's moving along. So you're going to have the sort of the damage is already done. So, and I don't want to get into a discussion about the vaccine situation now because we're not going to settle anything. I'm just talking about, stuff that's factual over the last 15 years. That's a lot of where this came. So anytime you do something statistically or sciencey, you have to think about replication. Can this be replicated? Will these, someone else is going to try to do the same thing. And if the results don't come out at least reasonably close to what I got, people are going to start wondering if I made this up. Using a sample size that is large enough to let the true nature of something come through, and including randomness. I think I mentioned before, there's I think 8 of us in the math department doing a new project about testing, and we're supposed to be using statistics, but the reality is our sample sizes are way too small to be in any way statistically valid. Like we're looking at it to try to get feedback on whether it's working or not, but it's just too small, right? We wouldn't be able to publish this information or anything because it's not scientifically sound because our sample sizes are too small. We weren't able to randomize things. So if people wanted to attack our statistical methods, they would be justified in doing so because we're even admitting we're trying to use statistical tools here just so we can get a sense if we're moving in the right direction, but it's by no means like enough to prove about what we're doing. Okay, blinding. Blinding is important. I think I mentioned this last time about biases, right? Science is showing more and more we all have biases. We have biases that we know about. We have unconscious biases. We have things that affect, we have opinions that seep into the things that we do. You don't want this to happen in statistics. Because it'll flavor your results. So, what you have to do, let's say you're a doctor and you have 2 sets of patients that are coming in. You're giving one set of treatment and you're giving the other set just a placebo, which is like a fake pill or a fake shot so that they think they're getting the thing. So that's kind of the blinding effect on the patients, which is where you don't want them to know what group they're in, because if a group knows they're in the control group, which is that you're not getting the treatment, or they know they're in the group getting the treatment, that can actually affect the outcomes. It's weird. Science doesn't completely understand how the mind is connected to some of this stuff. Why, like, they've done research that shows if you know you're in the placebo group, you still get a better benefit than nothing at all. Why would that be? They haven't really completely figured this out. But there's blinding in that way, where the people in the survey and the study should not know what they are, which group they're in. But then also the person conducting the experiment shouldn't know what group the patients are in, because if I know you're in the group getting the shot, it may, I may have a bias thinking, I think this person's going to get better. But that opinion of me knowing that you got the actual shot might influence my results. So what I need as the doctor is I need to not know which group you're in, and then I can make observations that are not connected to my own biases, right? So in other words, I might have an assistant and he or she knows what group you're in, but they're not going to tell me. That way I can make really good observations. And if we're both blind, then that's called the double blind, right? So that nobody, basically no one making decisions or observations knows what's going on. I have an assistant who knows who's in which group, but when I'm making the observations, I don't know which group you're in, right? So that's pretty important, blinding. If you're not doing some kind of blinding, then it's harder to get good results. Confounding occurs in an experiment when you are not able to distinguish among the effects of different factors. Try to plan the experiment so that confounding does not occur. This is very difficult because in life, very rarely, especially ethically for humans, like we can't just put humans in a cage and then just sort of affect one aspect of their lives. People are living lives. They go to work and they have families and they, have playtime and they eat food and do all sorts of different things that are outside of our control. And so sometimes it's really hard to determine everything about, say, a health study, right? Because there's lots of different things going on. So confounding just means there's so many variables involved that it's very difficult sometimes to tell what's really at play here. We'll get into some of that. We don't need to spend time on that. Matched pair designs. Matched pair designs we'll talk about later in this semester. Matched pair designs can be very helpful in certain situations. So you might have like before and after. That's a matched pair. So let's say that you have a new exercise program and you want to be able in your commercial to claim that in the first 6 weeks people will lose 10 pounds, right? You want to make that claim. Well, then what you're going to do is you're going to come up with a bunch of matched pairs. Basically, you're matching a person with themselves, which sounds silly. Like, I'm matching with myself. Well, you're matching with your future and past selves. So past, I'll make up a name, Gary. Past Gary is going to be matched with future Gary. And you, as you run your exercise equipment company, are hoping that future Gary weighs 10 pounds less than past Gary does, right? So you're comparing Gary with himself and saying, well, he took our treatment, he took our 10-week program, and now, or 6-week program, now he weighs 10 pounds less. So that's a matched pair is where you have some type of a matching that forms a pair. In this case, past Gary and future Gary. Matched pairs may also be married people, right? You may want to know about, like, okay, well, in some situations, if the wife is doing one thing, does that affect what the husband's doing? Like, for instance, if the wife works versus not work, how does that affect the marriage in these different ways? So what you would do is you'd have a bunch of matched pairs, which are married couples, and then the matched pairs would be the husband and wife marriage couple. Those would be the matched pair. And then you could say, okay, well, here's the group where the wives don't have a job, a paying job. I don't want to get into like the ethics of all this kind of stuff, just understanding the experiment. You would have the group where the wives don't have a job or whatever. And then the husbands, how does that affect this other part of the marriage? And of course, you could do it the other way around. You could say, well, what about where husbands don't work? What about when the wife is the worker for the family, and then the husband doesn't, he stays home and does different things, right? So there's lots of different ways that you could set this up depending on what you were trying to study, right? Are you trying to study stay-at-home dads or husbands? Are you trying to study stay-at-home wives? What is it that your study's trying to get at? But it would be helpful to have those groups matched up, right? You're matching the wife with the husband, or like we talked about before, you can match a before with an after for other types of experiments that you're doing. So matched pair designs, you compare exactly two treatment groups by using subjects matched in pairs that are somehow related or have similar characteristics. A test of Crest toothpaste used matched pairs of twins when one twin used Crest and the other used another toothpaste. So that's twins is statistics loves twins a lot of times because you have people with identical DNA, right, if they're identical twins, but then you can do different things to them, and then you don't have a lot of those variables that can confound things or reduced because, well, they have identical DNA. So in this case, does the Crest toothpaste do a better job than the other brand? But there's lots of experiments you can do this way. So matched pairs can be helpful in lots of ways. Sampling error is the difference between a sample result and the true population result. Such an error results from chance sample fluctuations. So as part of our discussion, you want to understand when we say error, usually if I say you made an error or there was an error, then you start thinking, oh, I did something wrong. I messed up. We did something not right. That's not necessarily the case in statistics. Sampling error just means that your work is not perfect. And in statistics, we can't always be perfect, right? You're not able going to do it. Remember, the thing we're ultimately trying to figure out is some information about the population. Remember the difference between sample and population? The population's the whole group we care about. The sample is the group that we measured. So when we measured the number of students at VC who support a tobacco ban, we wanted to know about the entire group of VC students, but we only asked maybe a couple hundred students. But we want to know about the population. Well, what if I measured, what if I did the work and I measured that 80% of students support a tobacco ban, but in reality, 81% of students support a tobacco ban? Well, technically, I have an error there. But you never know it because you can't ever magically know the real answer, right? I know students always think that, like, well, can't I just look in the back of the book and find the real answer? And the answer is no. If we could get the real answer, we would just do that. We wouldn't do all the statistics and then find out later oh, well, what's the real answer? The reality is we never really get to know. I don't know if the true proportion of students who support the full tobacco ban was 79% or 80% or 81%. We're pretty sure it's around that number, but I don't know exactly, so there's always going to be a little bit of an error in there. Now, the reason that's not a big deal is because if your error is small, it doesn't really matter if 80% of students support a tobacco ban or 81% of students support a tobacco ban. We're not going to make a different decision based on that. But if your error is really large, 40% versus 80%, well, that might lead to different decisions being made. So the size of that error is important, not just the fact that there is an error. There's honestly always going to be a small error, and like I say, you don't get to know the real answer anyways, right? We don't get to know that. So that's what a sampling error is when we don't nail 100% perfect the population result, but we probably won't know that anyways. A non-sampling error occurs when the sample data are incorrectly collected, recorded, analyzed. So all sorts of stuff could be wrong. Your questions could be poorly written, so people answer them poorly, or you're not able to actually use a lot of the data. If the data itself is recorded wrong, maybe you have a weather station that records data, but the programming got messed up and it's not recording correctly. Okay, well, there's a non-sampling error. So all sorts of things that can go wrong, and we just sort of want to be able to understand the difference between those different outcomes. Okay, so now we're getting into the part where we're actually going to do a little bit of we're actually going to get into crunching some statistics a little bit, right? So summarizing and graphing data. This is a huge, huge part of what we're doing. So I've mentioned before, like watching the news. Once you actually understand something about statistics, watching the news can oftentimes be absurd when people are talking about statistics that they clearly don't understand. We will, when we get to graphs here in a little bit, probably not today, but maybe next time, depends where we get. We might get to it next time, hard to say. You're going to see some like famously bad graphs. Like there's one news organization in particular. They all make mistakes, but there's one in particular that's like 100 times worse than the rest of them for having bad graphics, misleading graphics, intentionally misleading graphics, where they put stuff up there to give you the wrong idea on purpose. I mean, it's just, there's no other excuse for it sometimes. Like you might go, oh, well, that's just your bias that you don't like that news organization. Like there's no other way to justify what they're doing other than they are trying to mislead people certain times. So we'll take a look at those, and then you will start to understand a good graph versus a bad graph, because the reality is people don't like to read. People don't like words and words that have too many letters. People just skip it. They just go, I don't want to read. But people will look at a picture. Okay, so one of the most important things, a really, really important thing you do when you're presenting statistics is to make graphs and statistical graphics that people will look at and convey as much information as possible, because people will not read. They just, it's sort of, our society is, we're just moving more and more towards like English teachers will talk about this, how like students at this point have trouble reading paragraphs and pages because everything we read now is short. There's no attention span connected to reading, right? It's 160 characters, or it's 2 sentences on a Facebook post or something like that. The idea like they're seeing in English classes in schools, people have very difficult time like reading a short story or a book. Their brains just can't keep up, because after 160 characters, you're like, okay, I'm bored. Let's do something different. People aren't going to read a ton of your work, but if you can make a nice picture of it, they'll look at it for a few minutes and go, oh, this is a picture. I see, look at the picture. There's something in there. And they'll look at it. So we're going to talk a lot about those graphics and doing them well. It's not that hard to do them really well. But if you're lazy, they'll come out not good, right? You just, it might take you 30 seconds to make a really good graphic on StatCrunch, or it can take you 5 seconds to make a really bad one. Well, that extra 25 seconds is probably worth making a really good graphic, considering that's a lot of what people are going to look at is your graphics. So do not underestimate the importance of statistical graphics. Hugely, hugely important that we do it well. We don't try to mislead people with those graphics. We label everything. We get as much understanding through that graphic as we can, because that's probably all people are looking at. Because you can't pay people to read. It's sort of just not a skill people have much anymore. So are the survey results presented in a way that is fair and objective, right? In other words, your goal as a statistician is to present evidence. Your goal as a statistician is not to sit down and go, and not that you're all going to become statisticians, but what I'm saying is when you do statistics, unless you're working for an oil company or a cigarette company or something, your job is not to figure out how can I manipulate this data to get it to say what my bosses want me to say. If you're doing ethical statistics, then your job is to do as much research as you can, present the data in a way that you think tells the story that you want to tell, but not to be misleading, not to trick people and go, I hope they don't ask about this one thing, because that's kind of make my whole story fall apart. You want to say, here's what we found, here's where it is. You might disagree with my conclusions, but this is what we found. And you want to be open and honest about it, right? So fair and objective, so that you're not trying to sway people necessarily one way or the other. You might have a point of view that you want to convince people of, but your work should not be biased by that point of view. Okay, you should, again, it's like a prosecutor I always go back to this argument in a courtroom. The prosecutor has a point of view. He wants to convince the jury that the person is guilty. But that doesn't mean that he can present the evidence in a way that is misleading or intentionally confusing or trying to trick the jury. That would be unethical. You would get disbarred for that kind of a thing. You have to present your data in an ethical, objective way, and then you can say, see, this is what I think happened. See how the evidence supports what I'm saying? You can't change it or flavor the evidence to support your stuff. So it's kind of a subtle point that I'm trying to make, but your evidence has to be objective, and then you can then use that evidence to convince people of a point of view. Okay. Yeah, and here's a good example. I don't remember where this was CNN. So CNN's not great, right? And next time we meet, I'm going to give you some famous examples that show up from Fox News, but just, so no one gets offended. CNN's not like exactly great at this either. No, most your news agencies don't know enough about statistics or math to do this right. So here's one from CNN. See how this graph is, we'll talk more about why this graph is so misleading. Why is this graph misleading? It says, do you agree with the court's decision to have the feeding tube removed? And here's some values. Notice it's well labeled. That's one of the keys. Your graph should be well labeled. Why is this misleading, though? Because it's got the numbers labeled here, and no one's lying. Why is this misleading? You generally want to include 0 on your axis for a graph, because when your brain looks at this, the first thing it sees is this blue bar appears to be about 8 times taller than this one. So then your takeaway for most people will leave this graph going, the number of Democrats who agree with this is 8 times the number of Republicans. But that's not right, is it? 62% here think this thing, and 54% of Republicans. So actually, it's only 8% more, not 8 times as many, right? So why are we misled that way? Well, this bar is 8 times, is it 8? It should be 8 times taller than this one right here. So that's what your brain immediately interprets. It's only if you stop and really digest this graph do you realize, oh, there's no 0 axis here, so actually these are much closer together. Okay, that's misleading, and that's doing statistics poorly because you're misrepresenting the data, right? We'll see examples of that. Probably next time, where there's some really bad ones that do that. But just so no one thinks I'm being biased, here it is. We're calling CNN out as well, right? I'm not a big fan of CNN either. They both have both. We'll see stuff from Fox News. Also, right here we're seeing CNN. They both do it poorly. Okay, so we'll talk more about that as we get through things. So we have data. What are we going to do when we actually have data? And we want to get into that data, and we want to start analyzing it so that we can make conclusions and say things about our data. What do we need to know? Well, we need to know what are the different characteristics that our data can have. Well, one characteristic is what we call the center. You sometimes hear this called measures of center. So a representative or average value that indicates where the middle of the data set is located. We are going forward. I'm actually kind of surprised. I haven't seen this in here where they actually use the word average. We don't really want to use the word average. Most statistics textbooks will tell you right from the start. They'll tell you they'll say do not use the word average. So the problem with the word average is people use it to mean different things, right? So a word that has multiple meanings is ambiguous because we don't know what it means. When we use statistical measures of center, we're going to say exactly the one we talk about: the mean, the median, the mode. We're going to say the word. Otherwise, it just leads to confusion. Trust me, even when I'm having conversations with students and they say average, a lot of times it ends up to you and me having different ideas of what we're talking about. So we want to, most of you, when you use the word average, you're thinking of the mean. So we want to use the word mean. When we're using the word median, we want to use the word median, right? We don't want in everyday life, sometimes people talk about average, really could be either one of those. So we want to say the one that we're thinking of. Yeah, so there's a question in here about what news source do I think is most reliable. Um, I don't know that any of them are terribly reliable. Um, it kind of depends on what you're listening to or what you're watching as far as news and what is considered even news. Um, I know Science Friday tends to be pretty good with their statistics because they literally have science and statistics people on there, like as part of of that. So that's one show that I find tends to be pretty good. But by and large, you know, those it's hard for if you're younger, then you probably have one idea of what news is, but if you're older, then news has really changed in the last 40 years, and part of this is because we've changed the regulations on news. So there is no real what I would call news anymore. It's all they're all businesses, and they all have money to be made. They're all trying to make profit. So as far as what news source do I think is most reliable, really not many. Like it's difficult, and it depends what the topic is, right? Some places are sketchy about politics, while others are sketchy about science. So I wish I had a better answer for you, but in my opinion, news is dead. Kind of. There's no great news agencies out there. So it just So sorry, I don't have a better answer for that. But news is whatever channel you're watching is a business, and they have to make money. So you're really watching an advertising company. And once you start getting into how news companies work and you realize it's this 24-hour cycle they have to fill so they can sell advertising, you start to realize there's no objective news anymore. It's sort of all gone, unfortunately. So that's why you really kind of have to, when you watch the quote unquote news, you really have to do it with an understanding of statistics. You have to do it with a skeptical outlook and really wonder, is this person just trying to get me on their team, or is this person really have like actual facts that they're trying to talk about? It's very difficult. This is why we're seeing an age right now, and I don't want to go down a political rabbit hole, but it's kind of why we're seeing everyone just believes what they want, because we don't have good news agencies that can really be trusted anymore. And because of social media and stuff, you can find something that says you're right, whether that's legit. Sometimes you can find legitimate research that says what you think is right. Sometimes you find just somebody has a website that says you're right. Those are different sources. That's why it's, the scientific method, statistics and math and science, you have to be willing to give up your ideas. If you think, you'll find this in statistics, if you think something is true and you ask a question and the results come back very different than you expected, science demands that you go, oh, I guess I was thinking about that wrong. I guess maybe I should learn from this and think about it differently. Whereas, a lot of what we see in society today is people have an idea and then they go try to find the things that are going to support their idea. And that might be, it might be a discussion board on a certain website, or it might be a specific news agency, but you're looking for confirmation. That's not really scientific. That's just trying to find someone who agrees with you, and then that makes you feel like you can feel better about believing that thing. But the scientific method says when it's clear that your old ideas aren't good, you have to adopt the new ones. That's the responsible way of doing things, and it's hard because there's too much money to be made by controlling people, right, and telling people what to think. So we don't want to do that. We want to do things ethically, right, when we're doing statistics. So the center of a data source, it's called center, but what does center really mean? When we start looking at sets, there are different things that could be considered the center. Like, what is that? Like, how do I measure that? Well, what many of you think of as the average, which we're now going to call the mean, that's one way of measuring center. The median is another way of measuring center. We have 4 ways of measuring center, or 5 major ways. I have to sit down and remind myself. And you go, why don't we just pick the best one? Well, the best one in what situation? I'll show you an example probably tomorrow, or next time we meet. I'll start off with an example where usually what people want to know, what they ask about, is the mean. When people ask me, what was the average on the exam? What they're really asking me is, what is the mean of the test scores? And I'll explain to you why that's actually not the measurement you want to know. The mean is not a good measure in a lot of cases where we think it is. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's a really good measure, but sometimes it's not. Test scores, you probably want to go with the median. Home prices, you want to go with the median. Lots of different situations, the median is a better measure of center than the mean is, and people make wrong conclusions. Like what people usually want to know when they ask me, what was the mean? What they say is what was the average, but what they're asking is what is the mean? What they really want to know is were they in the top half or the bottom half? That's what people really want to know. Am I in the top group? Am I better than, are there fewer people better than me than worse than me? But the reality is the mean doesn't tell you that, because you can have a situation where 90% of the people in the class scored above the mean. So you're sitting there thinking, well, I'm in the top half, when really you're in the top 90%. How could that happen? Well, what if you had, out of 20 people, you have 18 take the test, and then 2 people show up and get a 0? Those zeros are going to pull the mean way, way down, and probably a huge portion of the class will fall above the mean, right? So a lot of the assumptions we make about the mean are wrong, right? And that's good. You're going to learn about the mean, and then you won't make those erroneous assumptions anymore. So you'll learn about this in your lessons. We've got the mean and the median. Those are the 2 heavy hitters for the center of data. We have a couple other little ones, but almost always when you talk about center, you're probably 99% of the time you're going to be talking about either the mean or the median or both. All 3 of those options happen all the time. Someone says, here's the mean, and they talk about the mean. Or someone says, here's the median, and they talk about the median. But more often than you would think, you're going to mention both the mean and the median. Why is that? Well, when the mean and median are close to each other, that gives you some extra information that we'll learn about. When the mean and median are far apart from each other, that gives you another perspective as well. Right, so we'll get into that when we talk about that more specifically. Right now I'm giving you the overview of these characteristics. We'll get into the specific, that's what the whole chapter is about, is the specifics here. So variation, a measurement of the amount that the data values vary. Okay, so and I'll show you StatCrunch next time a little bit, where I do some examples in StatCrunch, and you can start seeing how StatCrunch works. Variation. What if we had a class and every single person got the same score? Well, then there's no variation, right? How much did the scores vary? None. They didn't vary at all. Everyone got the same exact score. Well, that's very different than if people's scores were all over the place. One person got a 10, one person got a 90, one person got a 20, one person got an 80, and they're spread all over the place. Those are 2 very different outcomes, right? So that's variation. We want to know how much variation is there in our data. Right? Why is that? Well, what if you ask the question, do you support a tobacco ban? And everyone says that they support a tobacco ban. Well, then that's telling. Oh, it's pretty clear. People want a tobacco ban on campus, right? So we want to know how much variation there is. What about the distribution, the nature or shape of the spread of the data over the range of values, such as bell-shaped, uniform, skewed? You're going to learn what all those terms mean. Bell-shaped is really important for us. It leads us to what we call a normal distribution, which we'll be talking about. Uniform means they're all sort of, they all come up about the same. Then you have skewed, which the shape of the data can give you insights into the data itself. And we'll talk about that in a little, not today. We're going to run out of time here. I'm supposed to stop at 11:30 for the 90-minute cap, but so we'll talk about that distribution. So all of these things, these characteristics we're talking about, you should be investigating these every single time you do statistics. So for every single problem that you talk about on your project, you should look at center, you should look at variation, you should look at distribution. Like all of these things are important, right? And so I just want to make that clear on the project. It's not a checklist that you're going through. You're trying to find out all the information that you can say about things and then include it in a meaningful way. Just like that's what if you're the prosecutor in the court case, you look at tons of evidence. That doesn't mean you give tons of evidence to the jury. You might, but you investigate all the evidence. You figure out what's important and what's meaningful, and then you present that as part of your story. But behind the scenes, there was a lot of work that went on that the jury never sees. That's how statistics is. There's a lot of investigating behind the scenes, some of which will bring up very interesting points, some of which will not, and then you can decide what to include and not include in your final project. Although remember, for the final project, I do want to see that you understand all the concepts, so don't leave something out because you're like, well, that's not very interesting. I need to see that you understand it. Okay. Another term we need to know is outliers. Some values that lie very far away from the vast majority of other sample values. So you'll see this, a lot of times outliers jump out at you when you have a good graph. You'll see there's one data point that's way far away from all the other data points. We're loosely going to call that an outlier for now. We'll come up with a better definition of when something is an outlier or not using math. But for now, and just think loosely, an outlier is a value that lies far away from the rest of them. And this is actually a word you hear people use on a regular basis. They'll use the word outlier. So, and a lot of people don't know what that means. I've been in conversations where, someone later will ask me like, well, what was that word he said? What does outlier mean? Outlier just means it's like a very different data value. So for instance, I think one of the first times we did this project in class where we had the survey, someone asked about ages of people in the class. Well, most students at Ventura College are between 18 and like 21. Okay. Some people at 22, but it kind of starts to fall off, like 21, 22. It's the ages are falling off. And you have some people that are 14 to 18, but that's largely restricted because not a lot of people can make that work. And a lot of people are not, meant for college until they're 18. It just depends on the individual. So we have some people younger than 18, but not a ton of them. We see a huge boost from like 18 to 20. And then at 21, it starts to kind of taper down through the 20s. And then by the time you hit late 20s, you're just seeing very few people that are those ages. Well, we had one woman in the class was like almost 70, right? So you saw all this data that was like 18 to 20, and most of the data was between like 14 to 25. And then way, way, way out there, we had like whatever she was, 68 or something. So in that case, we would say, yeah, she's an outlier because her data value is so far out there compared to everyone else. That's what we call an outlier. Okay, we'll get more specific with what that outlier means. But for now, just think of that. It's a data point that's like way off by itself, right? It's like all lonely out there, no other data points around it to keep it company. Okay. You can have two outliers close to each other, but they would have to be, way, way far away from everything else. Changing characteristics of the data over time. So that's time. Time can change things, but that's a little more subtle. Study hint. Blind memorization is not effective in remembering information. That is absolutely true. You've heard me say that as a math teacher. I can tell you the students who just try to memorize things end up not having any idea what they're doing because they've memorized a bunch of facts, but they don't understand how things fit together. And then the projects and the same with tests. Tests don't go well. None of it goes well. So don't just blindly memorize. It's actually easier to just understand what's going on. I know many of you were taught to memorize things. That's how you get through a math class. You shouldn't even do it in math class, but it really doesn't work in statistics. Okay. Let's see. You got a few more minutes. So we're going to start off next time with frequency distributions. Frequency distributions are very convenient, and they also... The frequency distribution is sometimes used for its own work, but also the frequency distribution is a stepping stone to the histogram. The histogram is probably the most important. I kind of hate to say this. Someone would argue and go, I don't agree with that, and it's fine. It's an arguable point. But it could be argued that the histogram is one of the most important visuals in statistics. The histogram is very important. We use a frequency distribution as step one when we're creating our histogram. Basically, a histogram is a visual representation of a frequency distribution. Good news is StatCrunch is going to do these for you. So, I should mention StatCrunch, and then we'll finish up with that. So in StatCrunch, you're going to start seeing in your homework problems, sometimes they give you a data set. There's going to be a little blue rectangle with a line through it. That's a link, and sometimes you might not see it. You got to open your browser wide enough or scroll over so that you can see it. But if you click that, what it's going to do is it's going to open the problem in StatCrunch for you, which means the statistics is already there, and then you can practice things like having StatCrunch calculate the mean and the standard deviation and the median and all these different things that you're going to be calculating both for homework and for the project. You can start learning how to do those things because it's pretty easy if StatCrunch does it for you. Now, here's what I'll say. Don't just blindly go with whatever StatCrunch tells you. You have to tell it what you want it to do. So there's lots of different ways of setting up a histogram. And some will look better than others. Some will arguably be better representations than others. Don't just go with the default and say, here's my data, I'm making a histogram, here we go, we're good. What you might do is make 5 different versions of a histogram. It just takes a second, right? I mean, you could make 5 different histograms from your data in like 1 minute. But if you change a few little things that we're going to talk about next time, you change the starting point, you change the bin size, you change different aspects of your histogram, you're going to get different looking histograms. And sometimes one will pop out at you. Maybe you take your bin size and you change it from 10 to 5, and then you have it render that, and all of a sudden you go, oh, wait a minute, what's going on there? There's like a gap. Where did that gap come from? So the gap didn't show up when we had a bin size of 10, but it does show up when we have a bin size of 5. You're never going to see that if you don't experiment a little bit, and that's the great thing about StatCrunch doing this thing in a few seconds. If you want to make 10 versions of your histogram, it take you like 2 minutes. There's no time at all. So, and labeling your graphs. I'm going to show you how to do a lot of this stuff, but you just want to sort of understand it's really important to make your visuals really good and take a little bit of time to look at the values and decide, should my bin size be 2 or 10 or 5? Try all 3 and see which one looks best, right? So we will dive into StatCrunch. I believe next time we'll start getting into it because now I'm going to start showing you how to do some of this stuff in StatCrunch. Keep in mind when you're doing the homework, there's that little button that'll open it in StatCrunch for you, right? And then be aware at the bottom of the page, there's options for help. There's like, it's different for each problem, and I'm trying to remember this off the top of my head, but they have like example problems or like, different things that'll help you with that particular problem. Some students kind of never see that at the bottom. So just go down to the bottom and make sure you're using those so that you can, do it well. When you're using StatCrunch, the amount of time that some people will spend doing a minimal job and getting a poor grade is not really saving you that much time over the people who, like I say, do 5 versions of their histogram and pick the best one. I mean, they might have spent 5 more minutes making a histogram, like for their project. So that's 5 more minutes on a pretty important part, but they'll get like an A instead of a C or D or something like. So, a little bit of that extra work can really go a long way when StatCrunch is doing all the heavy lifting for you. Okay, so yep. So and Colin, so I know Colin's asking his newly formed partner. You might be able to contact. I always forget what it looks like on the student end, but you might be able to contact Javon through Canvas messaging. I don't know if it gives you. I don't know what it looks like from the student perspective, but you might be able to message each other through there. Okay, and then we'll pick up with frequency distributions next time. You're going to start to see some of this stuff in your homework. Remember, you want to both watch the videos for the lessons and then also attend these class meetings where we're talking. Start meeting with your group and start forming your ideas now about your questions that you're going to ask so that you can work on them and make them better as we move through the semester. Doing this kind of stuff at the last minute usually means people don't put as much time into it because you're going, well, we got to get it done tonight, so let's just get this done. But sometimes what will happen is if you met a week earlier and you came up with your questions, then when we're having discussions and we're talking about lessons, you go, oh, that makes me think we could do this question better. And then you go back and you rewrite it and you do a better job of it, right? You'll sort of remember like, oh yeah, we should do this on that one question. We should change the way this question is asked, and your questions will be much better. So I encourage you with your group, meet up, right? Figure out how you're going to meet, whether that's, I'm not saying you have to meet in person, but you can meet online. You can do Zoom, however you want to do it. Get together and work on those questions, and then see where you can go from there and do a good job with it. Okay? Thanks, everybody. I will leave Zoom open for anybody who wants to hop into Zoom and ask me questions. Also, I have office hours at noon, so I'll probably take a little break. My dog is acting up. I got to go check on him. And then, so either talk to me now or talk to me in 30 minutes during office hours, whatever works for you. Thanks, everybody. I will see you in a couple days.